A little while ago, I ran a poll on my community tab asking if you thought that English should be made an official language in Germany. Now, this isn't any kind of representative sample, of course, but a solid 50% of you said that you thought it either shouldn't or couldn't be done, which is quite a bit more than I expected. But one of the things that came up in the comments a couple of times is that it wouldn't be nearly such a big problem if only German bureaucracy was easier to understand. German officialese is impossible even for native German speakers to understand. Fix that, and maybe the language barrier won't be such a problem for non-native speakers. Okay, so there's something we could probably discuss, but can I talk about this subject without boring you all to tears? Let's find out. Now, I think that first we need to dispel a myth, which is that for anything legal or official, the language has to be very precise, and for that reason we need lots of legal jargon which cannot be open to misinterpretation. But that's not really the biggest problem with officialese, and I know this because when I was still a student living in England, there was a campaign at the time to make official communications more accessible to the general public, so that we didn't have to pay a solicitor just to understand what we were supposed to do. This book was compiled by the Plain English campaign from real-life examples of rampant officialese, beginning with the National Health Service's 160-word definition of the word bed. The back of the book also has a few examples of how officialese can be made easy to understand without making it vague or ambiguous. The problem is not really the legal jargon itself, but the way that official communications tend to use old-fashioned words, complex sentence structures, and other types of just plain bad writing. Let me give you a concrete example. A few years ago, my parents decided that as they were getting older, it would be a good idea to grant my sister and me power of attorney if they ever became incapable of managing their own affairs. Obviously, this is something that is very important to get right because a single mistake could have terrible consequences. This is one of the forms that they had to fill in. It's 20 pages long. But it's a lot easier than you might think. Now here's the first page, and look at how clear it is. This is how it deals with legal jargon. It defines the terms very precisely and unambiguously in ways that anyone can understand. It also has helpful notes in the margin, also written in clear, plain, simple, and unambiguous English. Here's another page, this one giving various options with clear and precise explanations of each. Again, notice how it doesn't avoid the legal jargon, but it does explain it. And there's a note in the margin saying if you choose this option, you should probably talk to a solicitor. So why isn't the German government making a similar effort? Well, it turns out that it actually is. I've managed to find a government-issued handbook instructing officials on how to communicate effectively, and it runs to 61 pages. It's not a recent thing either. This was actually published in 2003, which explains why some of the examples that it gives talk about prices in marks. The euro had only just been introduced. And the advice that it gives isn't about avoiding legal terminology, it's about style. It says things like, don't use nouns instead of verbs. Use concrete examples to explain abstract concepts. Use the active voice and not the passive. Concentrate on the most important information. In fact, when it comes to legal terminology, the guide says that you have to be very careful to explain it without trying to translate it. But in any case, the real problem with officialese isn't the legal stuff, it's everything around the legal stuff. Now, of course, this isn't to say that all officials follow all of the guidelines all of the time. So, how has my experience been? Well, a few years ago I applied for German citizenship, which has to be the ultimate test. And my verdict is, not as bad as you probably think, but also not great. Here are the first 2 pages of the form that I had to fill in. Now, the language itself is not that difficult to understand, although I do have a couple of complaints in that area. For example, right at the beginning, there is a sentence that unnecessarily uses a passive voice, and another sentence that talks about minors over the age of 16 without defining exactly what, in legal terms, a minor is. It's also not been properly updated. I know that it has been updated because it includes a reference to the General Data Protection Regulation, which was implemented in 2018, but I have found a couple of cases where the form uses old spelling rules that haven't been in use since 1996. But I think the biggest issue for me is the visual design, because it is so dense and yet still lacks any helpful explanatory notes. There is so much to do on each page that it really does look daunting. And by the way, this form is available online as a PDF, which you can fill in on the website and then print out. I mean, fair enough, but why force somebody to fill in an exact copy of the physical paper version? Why not create a web interface that guides you through the process step by step, with simple and clear instructions all the way, and then uses your input to generate a PDF, which you can either print out or email directly to your caseworker? And I think this typifies my experience with German bureaucracy. It's not usually as bad as its reputation, but it does look that bad. So, good start, Germany, but you really do need to put a lot more effort into it. And I know this because when I was still a student working And I know this because when I was still a student, I know it has been updated because it includes a reference to the General Data